Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. And yeah, that is definitely very funny that I went to the wrong room today. And me and just one other person, so we're just hanging out over there having fun. We're going to have a revival over there.
Well, maybe you're just not popular.
She said he heard you singing.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and pray, since clearly prayers have been answered because we're all in the same room and I have my video camera and my notes, so
That's right, $100.
but I'm out $100 and it was a well-spent $100. So, Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for a chance and an opportunity to be in your church, Lord, to live in this country and where we have a chance to be free. And I pray that we will exercise our freedom, Lord God, to tell everyone we know about your kingdom and about how awesome of God we serve, that he absolutely knows the beginning from the end, and that we have our lives hid in him, and that we can trust him. We know that he knows the future, and he knows where we are going to be in the future, and we are going to be at his side, Lord God, in heaven. And I just pray that we watch over everything that's said tonight. I pray a special prayer upon everybody that's listening, that we will guard our hearts and our mind, and that perfect love casts out all fear. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen.
So, now this is probably a very, very interesting subject in America. And basically the entire next part of the class is going to be spent talking about theories about where America could be in prophecy. And over the years, you know, I've heard a lot of people talk about this. Probably, again, one of the reasons I started teaching prophecy is largely because people don't understand that for the most part, America is not obviously in prophecy. And basically, most other Middle East nations typically are. And so the fact that we are literally the most successful, maybe the most powerful, the most rich, if you just go down the list, America fulfills that kind of notoriety on the scale of kingdoms on the world. And that's the kind of blessings that we really had in this country. So it is very curious as to how and why we could be in the end times and America is not addressed. Now, if you look here, this is, as many of you know, I got a chance to speak at All Pro Pastors, and they're asking me to write articles every month. So this is the first one I wrote. It's called The Convergence, Why Prophecy. It'll actually be covering the series I did called The Convergence. But here I wrote this in Luke 21 is primarily the passage. This is where we get our cipher, okay, that when you see these things happen, lift up your heads because your redemption draweth nigh. So I hope you get a chance to read this. This is a very simple and easy way to show people in the world why we know we're in the end times and why we're looking for Jesus to come back. So hopefully get a chance to read that. Now, as we start to go through this, one of the things that, as I've talked about before, that I had a fight with my dad and how I told him it would be stupid for everybody to fight about a little city called Jerusalem. Now that would never happen because nobody cares about that country. Well, we've seen this happen more and more. But one of the things that when I talk about prophecy in the church, the most common thing that people want to ask me about, first thing, what about the rapture? And the reason that they do that is really this, because they say, well, wait a minute. If I'm not going to be here, why do I need to know any of this stuff, right? And of course, that's a very valid point. But we talked about theories in the rapture in multiple classes that I've had. But there is a theory called the pre-tribulation rapture. And that theory says that we're going to see the rapture before the last 7 years of human history, before that tribulation starts. Now you'll see a couple passages we cover tonight chime in on exactly what type of tribulation will be in the tribulation. But the problem is that the peace treaty is what actually starts the tribulation. Okay? So the peace treaty means you probably had a war, which means we are likely to see a war before the last 7 year period of time, before the beast may be fully developed, before the Antichrist truly comes on the scene and we know he's the Antichrist. All of that means we could go through World War III. And as some of you remember, Forrest Paul at our church, he had a seminar, not a seminar, but a sermon about that. And I posted that, so this is not something that only Kevin believes, although Kevin does have a few weird things he believes that nobody else believes. But a lot of times I don't even share those things with you. So I try and share things that I think, are, actual real possibilities, okay? So that being said, this is why I started to talk about end times, because Christians in America are not prepared for the fact that what happens to America. If we're not there, there's only a few options and ways that we could go down. And so we talked about a whole book, Implosion of America. Joel Rosenberg wrote it. There's lots of reasons: financial implosion, disaster, war, terrorism, EMP attack. North Korea is experimenting with missiles over there. So it's not hard to see in ways which America could go down quite quickly. So these are scenarios really that we should be prepared for of a war before even a pre-tribulation rapture. Now there is a theory out there. It's called the pre-trouble rapture. That before anything bad happens, before anybody's purses or anything else gets stolen, before anybody dies, there's a pre-tribulation rapture that happens before all of that. And of course, at that point, it's very difficult. We can't say no, but at the same time, it's very difficult to build a case for a pre-trouble rapture. We are likely to see trouble before the rapture. So, here are the basic ones that we're going to cover here for the possibilities for American in prophecy. And we will go over all of these things over the next few weeks. The clay of Daniel 2. So we talk about the image and the head of gold and how it goes down through the kingdoms. If you look to your next page here, you're going to see this image. And this is what we talk about in Daniel, the 2nd chapter here. The head of gold, the chest of silver, the thighs of bronze. And there is a little error to this image, but we will talk about that in a minute. But this is the most common image that you're going to see, and it parallels it with Daniel 7 over here, which is what we're actually covering. Okay, but when you look here at Daniel 2, the last kingdom is the feet, which are partly iron. Now we know what the iron in the image represents. That's the Roman Empire. So the old Roman Empire comes back in some fashion, or is part of this final last kingdom. Okay, and this would be, of course, the beast of Revelation. Okay, so now we talked about how it's partly iron and partly clay. And this ties into the transhumanism idea. Okay, it ties into the days of Noah idea, that back in the days of Noah, there was genetic mingling going on. And in that passage in Daniel 2, it says that they are partly iron and partly clay, in that they mingled themselves with the seed of men. And right now, in the world today, they are mingling the seed of men with all types of different things. Plants, animals, and human beings are being fused. Okay? And that's called transhumanism. So we believe that this is a fulfillment of this last kingdom. That has never happened, which is one of the reasons we don't believe this kingdom has ever happened. Which means that we don't agree with the preterist view, which is that all of this has already happened. That the figurative kingdom of Christ coming was in our hearts, and it would never actually be a literal kingdom, that Jesus would one day actually come down, set his foot on the Mount of Olives, etc., etc., etc. Okay? So, we believe that we, as America, we could be the clay. It's possible we join the European Union and actually form that one world government. Our buildings, our architecture, the eagle was also the national bird of Rome. These are all things that show we have a connection to the old Roman Empire. And certainly if we joined with the EU to form this one world government, and we talked about the Ezekiel 38-39 war, where Russia may be very well taken out. There's other passages that talk about the ones from the Far East, which would probably be China, etc., or possibly India, where they're coming from the Far East with this 500 million man army. So there's a lot of desolation that happens to those kingdoms as well. So you can see there's wars that seem to take out a lot of the other superpowers. So maybe it's ultimately the United States and the EU that end up coming together to form the one world government beast. Okay? Now we talked about Mystery Babylon, and again, as I talked about, I gave it here, but about our buildings and architecture, there is, okay, a secret ambition, okay, a secret destiny for America, at least according to the occultic world. And that's what I go through in the Mystery Babylon series, and you can see that online, and so on and so forth at prophecydays.com. All the notes are there, all the speaking's been done, but it clearly shows that America is a very decent candidate. We show the connection, a mystery, a mysterious connection in really, hidden in plain sight type of stuff. The signs, the symbols, the secret religion, okay, of Babylon is here in America, and we have a connection to it. And when it looks at the city that's talked about there in Revelation, there's a lot of similarities between that and New York City. So now, we're going to talk about this one tonight in detail, but this is the eagle's wings of Daniel 7. So I won't say too much about that. Then we also have another eagle's wings that show up in Revelations 12. That's a nice passage. We will cover that as well. And then we could be the unnamed nation in Isaiah 18, and this nation also has buzzing wings. Then we talked previously about in Ezekiel 38 and 39 how the main protesters to the Ezekiel 38-39 Gog-Magog war is actually Tarshish and her young lions. Okay, so we will go back and revisit this, and this is where you're going to see another possibility with what is going on in America, and that somehow we are actually some ancestral connections to Israel herself. So these are all the possibilities that we're going to actually outline. Okay, so let's flip to this one here. The first thing I wanted to tell you is that when we look at Daniel 2 and we compare it to Daniel 7, here we have the image, okay, with all the body parts, and each body part as we go down changes from one material to another. They go gold being the most refined, and of course clay, earth, iron, those would be the most unrefined. So we see a degradation in the type of materials that are actually being used here. But most people prophetically believe that when Daniel receives the prophecy in Daniel 7, that this is an exact mirror image of the same thing. Essentially, it's the same prophecy. Now, here's what I'm going to say. If you look in the prophetic circles today, basically almost everyone agrees that the feet of iron and clay and that the beast, okay, in Daniel 7 are the same. Now, I said here that there's an error. Well, there is. These are two separate kingdoms. If you look at these two kingdoms, the legs of iron is one kingdom. Okay? The next kingdom is actually the feet, because it's a different body part and it's a different what? Substance. Yes, it still has some iron, but there is a clear delineation here. And more importantly, there's almost a 1900-year gap between these two kingdoms. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So when you look down here, they've abbreviated it to 4. And these are connected, but they're still separate in history. And we know that because clearly they're a separate body part, and clearly they have what? A different material that makes them up. So this, in my opinion, is trying to make it fit this. Okay, because if you look at the kingdoms here, this is 5 kingdoms, and this is only going to talk about 4. So it doesn't match up in the number of actual going from one to the other. If it was going to be really a true parallel, it should have been 5 to 5, not 5 to 4. Does that make sense to everybody? So again, remember that I am in the minority, okay, on this, but nonetheless, you're going to see there's an excellent case, which is why I'm covering, and I am not the only one who believes this. I can't give you exact percentages, but you're going to see it's very compelling when you actually walk through it. Okay? So, that being said, one of the reasons that, and I put this here, but in Jeremiah 49, 14 through 22, and then 28, there are parts of the Bible where Jeremiah clearly seems to connect, okay, the head of gold with also being a lion, okay? And so that's one of the reasons they can connect the head or the gold to a lion in Scripture, but again, it's very difficult to connect the rest of those beasts to the same image here, where the bear is somehow the chest of silver, the leopard has really anything to do with the bronze, and the beast. First of all, the old Roman Empire is not the beast. It's just not the beast. It's not the beast. So there's your correlation, it doesn't fit. Okay, but a revived old empire, okay, or a partial Roman empire combined with something else, that clearly represents the beast that we're going to see. So you can see, you know, they're really trying to make this fit, and in my opinion, it just doesn't fit. And we're going to talk at length about that. So let's read the passage. This is his vision of the 4 beasts, okay? This was actually the first prophecy in the book that was revealed directly to Daniel. So he actually saw this one. Nebuchadnezzar was the one that saw the dream from Daniel 2, but Daniel interpreted it. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
So in the first year of Belteshazzar, of king of Babylon, again, this means that this is at the tail end of Babylon. because he doesn't last, Babylon doesn't last much longer. The next kingdom's already coming in. Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. And then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. The four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So it is true, now listen guys, that England is also obviously represented by a lion. That clearly that England did birth the United States, which our symbol is an eagle. And it's true that we clearly separated from them. Okay?
Wow.
So if you were to take America and Britain together, you would tend to see a lion with eagle's wings. And of course we did separate, we are clearly a separate country. So here's our first connection. Okay? Now, it says that this lion later stands up. So what does the lion of England do? He stands up. That's their symbol. And then we can show the progression in their history that their lion did stands up. Now my dad talks about one, I couldn't find this, I looked for, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes, but it talks where the British lion stands up, and his hands are up like this, and he's got a red heart, symbolizing that a man's heart had been given to him. So I couldn't find that, but I am mentioning, so that would be another possible correlation here. Okay? If the eagle's wings are plucked, what does that represent? Well, clearly it's a separation. Or does it represent that maybe there's some consequence, or that somehow this eagle is destroyed? So certainly we have to look at that as a possibility. Okay? Now, let's keep going. Verse number 5. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear, he was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in his mouth between his teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise and devour much flesh. Of course, we all know that the Russian bear is absolutely another major country in the world today. And this has been a huge factor in the world, and communism comes from there. There's probably been no more carnage caused in the world today than by Russia. Just killing of its own kind. It's probably killed almost 100 million people, more than World War II. So when people talk about communism, it's funny how they've completely lost the amount of evil that has really come from Russia. And after this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. Okay? The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now, of course, most people believe this is Germany because of their Leopard tanks, and so this was a little bit of synonymity with Germany. There are some other thoughts from other people that believe that this could be Islam, and certainly I've heard some decent arguments, so I'm going to mention that. But the point here, you'll see that it doesn't matter so much that we know 100% on this stuff. You'll see a lot of reasons why these are the kingdoms that are going to make up the beast. And you're going to see that they somehow keep some of their identity while the beast is there, and you're going to find that the beast is actually destroyed, and yet these countries still go on to exist, which is one of the key reasons why it's very difficult to make a case that even after Jesus Christ comes back, how these countries can still exist if they really are Babylon, Persia, Greece, okay, and then of course the old Roman Empire. How all 4 of those would somehow still exist. So we'll talk about that as we go along. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, had huge iron teeth. Okay, so here we see another thing with iron. It had devouring, breaking in pieces, trampling the residue with the feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and had 10 horns. So here's a big identifying factor. There's not a lot of details about this, but these 10 horns are significant, because we know the beast has 10 horns from Revelation. It would consider the horn, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom the 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. So if we look back to Ezekiel 29:21, we basically again see similar imagery, how this horn grows, and describes how this king's power grows. And of course you'll see later on, it's exactly what Revelation says. This is the Antichrist coming up out of those nations, one of those kings speaking great things. And there in his horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, the mouth speaking pompous words. I watched till thrones were put up in place, and the Ancient of Days seated, and his garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from him, before him. 1,000 and thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. I watched them because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beast, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So here we have this passage clearly saying that these kingdoms exist at the time the Antichrist and the beast of Revelation, the kingdom beast, come up, okay? And even after God comes back and destroys the beast, these kingdoms still have some amount of identity and some amount of existence. And that is very difficult for you to explain to me how that is true of Daniel 2, where all we have the head of gold, the silver, and so on and so forth represent those. I was watching in the night visions, behold, like one the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient Days, and they brought him before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. Dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. So this is God's permanent kingdom. He will never be displaced. Now, this keeps going. Daniel 15, it says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions had troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are four kings, okay, which means also possible kingdoms, which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom, possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast, how he was different from all the others, exceeding dreadful, with his teeth of iron and his nails of bronze, which devour broken in pieces and trample the residue with his feet. And the 10 horns which were on his head spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and the judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High. And the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Okay? So, now, remember, the idea of a saint is really kind of a New Testament word. So most people believe that we're talking about basically God's people, Israel. Okay? But nonetheless, we have to look at what the text said, and that's where something you can kind of go back and read some commentaries on that. Okay? Now, we talk about no way and whether the saints are Jews or Gentiles here. Later terms seem to indicate a Jewish emphasis, but this passage does not say that the saints are from Israel. Okay, so we cannot confirm that we're not talking about the church. We can't 100% say that we're not talking about it. Okay, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, trample it and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. So these 10 horns are other kings. Again, remember that the United Nations breaks down the world into 10 regions. And each shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings, and shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given to his hand for time and times and a half. That's 3.5 years. So there's a very clear thing here that you'll see that keeps coming back. That the Antichrist, even though it's a 7-year tribulation, really only has power over the saints to persecute people, etc., for 3.5 years. Okay? For the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and greatness of the kingdoms on the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts were greatly troubled, and my countenance changed. But I kept the matter in my heart. So, this is another troubling thing. Remember, if he really saw the same thing that was revealed to him in Daniel 2, why was he so greatly troubled if he saw the same thing? So we'll make that point in another minute. Now, a lot of information here is tied directly into basically Revelations 13. So this passage has the exact same four same animals forming this dragon. And so let's read it. And he stood on the sands of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns, 7 heads, and his horns were 10 diadems. So you see again the 7 heads, the 10 horns. Okay, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a lion, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like those of the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him power, his power and his throne and great authority. Okay? So here we have this amalgamated, okay, beast that gives exactly the same animals as Daniel 7. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. That's 3.5 years. He only has 3.5 years. Now I stop here because people think about the tribulation as 7 years of tribulation. You could argue, okay, that the war before the tribulation could be worse than the first 3.5 years, because it's only in the middle of the tribulation, at the moment of desolation, when the abyss, which is where the spirit of the Antichrist exists, until it is opened. And that key is given back, and that Antichrist comes out of them. And so what we have when the Antichrist is, he will be the Antichrist, but he won't be actually possessed, demonically possessed by the spirit of the Antichrist. That happens in the middle of the tribulation. So this is what this means. If there's only 3.5 years where he is able to persecute the saints, and we could be talking about Israelites rather than saints, because the rapture could have happened by this point. Okay? So, during the first part of the tribulation, things just aren't that bad. And the Antichrist doesn't really do much with respect to persecuting the saints. So that's a real possibility. The other possibility is that because the wrath falls so severely in the second part of the tribulation, okay, that God's wrath is doing what?
Okay.
It's absolutely judging the world, okay, and including the Antichrist. And that judgment, that wrath of God being poured out in those last 3.5 years, may be why he doesn't actually have any power there at all. But it's really interesting to think about the fact that there's really only 3.5 years that he has this power. Now there is a third, and that's what I just said. That God's wrath is really what keeps Satan from having a lot of power, because God himself is judging the earth to the point that Satan can't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, the other one I listed in here is that the first part of the tribulation, the saints are actually there. It's not that bad. He doesn't have power to persecute the saints because he hasn't become demonically possessed yet by the spirit of the Antichrist. Okay, but the rapture happens in the middle of the tribulation, okay, and then therefore that would change everything. Does that make sense? So we look at they would only be there for 3.5 years, and then that persecution only happens in the first 3.5 years, but they're taken out in the middle of the tribulation. Therefore, he only had 3.5 years to crack at them. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's interesting how this dynamic gives us some ideas about how things could work out in the tribulation. Okay? So now we are on to page 48. Okay? But the key here is that the beast really only has 3.5 years to act out as he wishes. So if we look back at Daniel, okay, and we see that the power of the Antichrist, okay, is coming in the same thing. This is where there's agreement pretty much across the board that the last final kingdom is the beast of Revelation, and you can see how Revelations 13 ties into that directly. Okay? So let's go back here. Now this is Revelations 13 still. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against blaspheming his name and his tabernacle, and those that dwell in heaven. And it was given him to make war with the saints and overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name was not been written in the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb, who has been slain. If anyone has to hear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. There is the perseverance and faith of the saints. So here you have, this is using the word saints again, and again, at this point we wouldn't necessarily be thinking that, you know, who are the identity of these people? Are these people the Jewish people? Are these people the Israelite people? Or are these people saints? Clearly the idea is that they're God's people, okay? And that there is a perseverance. And this is why the reality is that, you know, prophecy creates so much fear on the part of people in the world today. And here this verse is really saying to us that God is in control of all of it. And there have been many people that have died for their faith, and the martyrs in Christianity have been, astonishing. In the same way, we've also covered how the world has mercilessly pursued Israel and destroyed them at every chance they could get because of that everlasting hatred, family feud, if you will, that started 4,000 years ago. Now, is America in Daniel? Well, this is what's really exciting, because when you look at basically at Revelations, when the beast comes back together, guess what it doesn't have? It doesn't have the eagle's wings. Remember, the eagle's wings came off. And so when these amalgamations, the lion, the bear, and the leopard come back together to form the beast of Revelation, the wings are missing. Which could mean, if we are those wings, it means that maybe we are not there. Okay? So the final beast is hardly described at all, just the 10 horns, really. And we'll see how this lines up. But other than that, everything is strikingly similar. So here is a nice little article that outlines it for you. You look at the beast of Revelation versus the beast of Daniel. The beast arise out of the sea. It says up from the sea. Like unto a leopard. Another says like a leopard. The feet of a bear, like a bear. Mouth of a lion was a lion. The dragon, okay, is what the Bible really kind of calls. If you look back, it's maybe not the best description, because it says the dragon gives him his power. Okay? So, but the other one, Daniel says it's a fourth beast, is dreadful and terrible. Doesn't give a great description. 7 heads, 7 heads. 10 horns, 10 horns. So these are all the similarities between the beast of Revelations 13 and Daniel 7. For me, this is a wrap. We're talking about the same exact situation here. Okay? We talk about a lot of other things here. Notice that the times that the little horn has, 42 months. Okay? Both passages talk about that. The beast and the little horn had a notable leader. The number of man, the eyes of man. Talks about the blasphemy, the great words, making war with the saints. Gave him his power and seat. So there are a few things. If you flip this over now to page 50, it looks like the deadly wound, the wound that's healed, those are mostly in Revelation. But when it talks about the beast has religious power and receives worship, both of those come out in Daniel and Revelation. The mark also seems to be talked about in Daniel 7:25, because it says he seeks to change times and laws, which means he is now going to change everything. So here's why I have never believed the standard interpretation of Daniel. Number one, none of the kingdoms are directly identified, but in Daniel's vision there is. We know exactly who those are, but we do not, have never known in history who the others are. Okay? So it's very difficult to nail down what's happening in Daniel 7, is respect exactly who that animal is. This came late in Belteshazzar's reign. Okay? So this is at the end of Babylon. So it seems like a little late. Okay? And then also there's a repeating of the same basic dream. It's the same exact meaning as the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? And why is Daniel so deeply disturbed if he's really getting basically the second version of this? Okay? When it really says that he's shaken, he is really shaken by this dream. So the question is, why is God being so redundant? Why is he telling the same story basically? What if he's telling a little bit of like I believe that there's a 2,000-year-old gap, it's 1,900 years, between Rome, which is the legs of iron, and then the iron and clay feet. There's a separate gap there. The reason I believe the gap is there is simple, because Israel wasn't a nation. Okay, this is all going to happen in and around for Israel. So I think it just seems to me very, very redundant. Okay. Also, we have very little information about these animals. We don't really know much about them at all. Whereas the parts of silver and breast and so on and so forth, we have very detailed descriptions. Okay, bottom line, we have countries in the world today that very clearly seem to fit this whole passage. But these other beasts, they really were destroyed. We have Babylon that's been gone for so long, and so some of this has been gone for a very long time. So this 1,900-year gap, if it really is there, which I believe it is, then it means that it would be perfectly normal to have another passage that describes who's going to make up this beast, okay, from the kingdoms that are on the earth when it actually comes into power. If there really is a gap between those two kingdoms, then we would expect God to give us a little more information, okay, about who's going to actually form this. Does that make sense? So I feel like, you know, it's a pretty big amount of information to give us actual countries 1900 years later that are gonna
Right.
come back and make this beast, okay? So, that 1900 years is certainly why you can see there's a lot of confusion, okay? Now, why would God choose the bear and the leopard in this passage to describe Medo-Persia and Greece, but in a few passages later, use a goat and a ram, the same countries? Why switch animals? Doesn't make any sense to me, okay? So this is another big one, even though we can say there's some passages in Jeremiah that talk about Babylon being, you know, we know he's the gold head according to Daniel 2, but talks about how they could be a lion. But what about the other countries? We can't really see that at all. And we also have Daniel specifically talking about Medo-Persia and of course Greece, and it uses the goat and the ram. So why would they suddenly change animals? Doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you use the bear and the leopard in this passage? It just doesn't match. So Daniel's primary focus is on the last beast, because that's the one that really bothered him. And this is the one where virtually everybody agrees. And this is the kingdom that we're going to see in effect when Christ comes back. Okay? Now the final beast is all is described very at all. The 10 horns fits the passage of Revelations 13. Okay? So not only is it familiar, but it brings back the exact same people, the exact same animals. Okay? And they're all rolled into one, which means to me that these are the actual countries that are in existence, okay, when the beast comes into power. They're there, and the beast comes in and takes over them, and they still maintain some of their identity because the beast actually has their characteristics. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay? He doesn't, this is where Daniel's vision doesn't fit this. See, it doesn't fit that they're an amalgamation. Okay, so the last kingdom is what? Partly iron and partly clay. It's not gold and silver and bronze and iron. Do you see this? So again, if it really is an amalgamation of all these, that's where these passages clearly seem to be talking about something else. Because the lion, the bear, and the leopard are clearly an amalgamation for this last final beast. And that is all explained because there's a 1900-year-old gap. God to have it give us another prophecy so that we would know 1900 years later who was actually going to make up this beast. Okay? As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and time. There's no way you can argue with me that essentially after Christ comes back, that Babylon, Persia, okay, and the Medo-Persians, and then of course Greece, and then of course Roman Empire are actually going to exist. You can say the Roman Empire because we see the EU fired back up today, okay? But it's very difficult to say that these countries have an identity that's going to actually go on after Christ comes back. But you could certainly make a case that Russia, Britain, okay, and Germany would still be able to have some type of identity for a while, even in the new millennium. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's go to what, I mean, this is so poorly copied today.
It's
Now, at the end-
okay. Yeah, hey, don't beat yourself up, you're doing a great job.
I'm having trouble reading this one. So, at the end of the vision in Daniel 2, the image is completely destroyed. Okay, no kingdoms are left whatsoever. This doesn't match the situation here. These kingdoms are annihilated in Daniel 2, and yet somehow they keep on going on in Daniel 7. So again, that does not match the situation here. In Jeremiah, as we talked about, it does say that Nebuchadnezzar is compared to a lion and an eagle, but again, is that really going to trump all of what I've said here? Okay? Now, this guy doesn't agree with me, and I printed his article because it's really good. Okay? So you get to read on. I'm going to bring a few things in here because what he shows you is a lot of great stuff about prophecy. And so even though we disagree, it doesn't mean he's not really, really good. Okay? And have very, very good, valid points. Does that make sense? So he talks here about how the liberals, again, require basically, they really believe that everything's happened, or everything's symbolic. Okay? And then the futurists, you know, are always trying to shove everything into the future. Does that make sense? Or shove it into this box. He talks about how the Bible is trustworthy. But he also talks about how everything must be understood in light of the Bible, and basic hermeneutics is how we know who was speaking, who are they speaking to, and what was the situation politically. So we have to know and study the Bible appropriately to try and come up with some of this stuff, okay? Again, some prophecies have been partly fulfilled, some haven't. But he basically says, this is what I like, above all, the prophecy in this chapter means precisely what God says it means in this text. Nothing more and nothing less. But remember, there is a veil to prophecy. And I believe that until it gets close, or sometimes it's already happened before we really realize. Because like, for us, hindsight's 20/20. Okay, we say, hey, I wish I'd have done it right the first time. But sometimes we really learn what? From our mistakes. Does it make sense? And what's the biggest mistake we can make with our life? To not trust God. And hindsight 20/20, when you see that God was in control the whole time, okay? Has anybody ever had deja vu?
Yeah.
Every time I've ever had deja vu, it's like God saying, see, I told you I knew it all. I gave you this little glimpse into your life. You're exactly where I wanted you to be. So I sometimes think of prophecy in the same way, okay? Let's flip the page to, let's see, 52. So he makes some nice parallels, okay? And again, he says that these are, that they're similar. He says because we have a 4-part statute. And we have 4 beasts. That's wrong. There's no way, I'm sorry, you cannot make that case. That is a 5-part statute. Okay, that the old Roman Empire is never going to be the beast of Revelation. It's not. That was back in history, and that's something a preterist might believe. But again, it's not something, if you're not a preterist, everybody else believes there are really 5 parts. Okay? So you'll see what he says here, some of the contrasts and so on and so forth. If you want to get into reading some of that, just want you to know that this is a very valid perspective. This guy is very good. And the people that argue this perspective, you know, this is how they think about it all. And again, I'm trying to show you that this is a valid possibility. It has lots of reasons for it. And most importantly, if you're looking for America in prophecy, this may be one of the best places is to see that if Britain really is the lion and the eagle's wings came off, it is very encouraging for me to know that if that's America, we are not part of that final one world government. Okay? And he does talk about how they're allowed to live on, which to me should make somebody think that maybe we're talking about something different. Now, I like his conclusion. He says, prophecy is necessary because God has chosen to settle his accounts with men slowly. We think everything should happen now, but God's not bound by time. Prophecy is necessary so that men are reassured of divine deliverance and blessing as well as divine judgment. Okay? Through the ages, the saints have learned that they must wait for the promises of God to be fulfilled and that this may not happen in their lifetime. Okay? So, these are some great statements about prophecy. While the timing of the fulfillment of divine prophecy may be seen remote to the recipients, it still is relevant for God. It's absolutely part, and that's why God talks so much about everything as if it's right now, because to him it is. Okay, the finest commentary on prophecy for Daniel really comes from the Lord himself, and he really goes and shows you in this passage how Jesus Christ ties into so much in Daniel, which makes Daniel really the foremost Old Testament book in prophecy. And even Christ refers to it. So you need to know that Christ used Daniel. He was quoting from Daniel. Okay? Let me see if I can get this. When he quoted to the scribes and Pharisees, he says, nonetheless, I tell you, hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power coming in the clouds of heaven. He was quoting from Daniel 7:13. That's how intertwined what the Olivet Discourse, okay, and of course we talked about how Luke 21 may not actually be been given on the Mount of Olives, and that's of course in this article that you see here. But it's very important for you to know that this all is exactly what Jesus was tying into in a lot of this stuff. Suffering is to be expected by the saints before they enter the kingdom of, glorious kingdom of God. Okay? Cannot read that page.
What page?
I can't read the page numbers on either of those.
Oh, that's 53.
53 is
The 53 is where you just read.
Yeah, 53.
Listen
It's
to
hidden
this.
by the staple.
Prophecy is not written as hype, but revealed to produce the hope of glory and endurance that is present in the tribulation. Prophecy is written to sober the saints. Prophecy is real not to give us particular things to come, but to change our perspective about what's coming. I mean, he has some absolutely great quotes here. So let's go to page 55 and 54. So great perspective on prophecy. We see a gap, an almost unsurmountable gap between suffering and glory. God does not. Suffering and glory are part of one work. In the same way that when we birth a child, okay, if you look at the travail of a woman, I have never seen my wife, any person, in so much pain. And yet, my wife and I, we don't have any memory of that. I can recall it, but all we see are those two children. What did you say?
You didn't feel the pain, she did.
She does, but she's ready to do it again. Okay?
Congratulations. I hope it's twins.
That's right. So now for somebody that's really smart and really amazing, Irvin Baxter agrees with me. So we give you his article a little bit. Okay, so I like this, what he said though in the last part. He says, prophecy is revealed to men to change their perspective, to urge them to see things as God sees them, rather than the way they appear to the human eye. And I think that this is where we need to realize that even though I don't agree with people in prophecy, and I can make my case and they can make their case, at the end of the day, this is all about supposed to be a mystery. It's supposed to be veiled. We're not supposed to be able to predict the future. But again, this is where we're going to also try and bring out the things that I believe could possibly be America. Okay, he does bring up, Aaron Baxter talks about clearly depicting all the nations of the world, and certainly all the nations of the world are addressed in the end times. Okay, he talks about how the other beasts are prolonged. He talks about how the fourth beast dominates the entire earth, whereas none of the kingdoms in Daniel 2 really seem to do that. Okay, he talks about the four heads of the leopard. This is a very interesting point. One of the reasons he believes it was Germany, because the reality is Germany was what? Hitler, he had something called the Third Reich. Okay, so what's the Fourth Reich? That's what they're trying to do today. If Germany comes back again, that would be the Fourth Reich, which is why he has the four heads. Does that make sense? So this is another reason, and I wanted to give that because he brings that out. The leopard Daniel saw had bird's wings, which represents France and its natural symbol of a rooster. France and Germany have not only corroborated on the leopard tanks. So these are some other similarities that he sees. Okay. Now we talked about how Islam could possibly be the leopard, but I'm not going to give you a lot on that one. But it really wasn't a bad read. I probably should have. So maybe I forgot. I don't remember. It was a long time ago when I did this. So what does our future hold for America? Remember again that the eagle's wings represent the United States. It could be because somehow we are not involved, and that gives me hope. I'd rather probably be something else than be involved in that last kingdom. We talk about an uncooperative force. Are we destroyed? Are we an ally of Israel, like it seems to mention here in Ezekiel 38 and 39? We're going to be talking about the plucked wings here. It could be apathy, it could be destruction, but at some point we are clearly possibly an ally of Israel. Okay, in Ezekiel 38-39, Gog-Magog war, we could be the young lions, the protesters there. The problem is that the lion, who was clearly a protester in Ezekiel 38-39, clearly seems to be part of that one final beast. So England seems to be part of it if we use this particular model, but the eagle's wings aren't. This is interesting because they just went through Brexit, you know, where they voted themselves off the island, out of the European Union, okay? So let's flip over, that was 56. This is a nice little passage. Now, a lot of people are saying this, maybe something you can Google, but a lot of people are saying that Revelations 12 is actually happening in the heavens. If I get enough time in one of the classes, I may actually go through this. But this is the persecution of Israel, who is going to deliver the child, the Messiah, okay? and it is persecution by the dragon. So let's read it real quick. The woman is Israel because she has a crown of 12 stars on her head. The dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns, just like the beast in the image of Daniel. Okay, so the woman gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. This is also, again, talking about the war in heaven is going to break out. Okay? Now, this persecuted woman picks up in verse 13. It says, "And the dragon saw that he had been thrown to earth. He pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child." Okay? But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle to fly from the presence of the serpent to her place in the wilderness, where she was nourished for a time and times and a half. How long is that, guys? 3.5 years. So she flees where? To the wilderness. That sounds like Matthew, where he talks about when you see these things happen, you're going to flee. When you see Jerusalem surrounded, you're going to flee. Where? To the wilderness. So the thing here that comes out, "But the mouth of the serpent spewed water like a river to overtake the woman, sweep her away in the torrent." Oh, before I missed the whole point there. She was nervous in time and a half. Here again we see the period of 3.5 years. So again, but it talks about eagle's wings coming to protect her. Okay, so again, this is a tie-in to eagle's wings. Could that be part of Revelation 13? We're going to see later. Where that doesn't appear, or is that tie into Daniel? But nonetheless, there are eagle wings, and of course, being the young lions of Tarshish, being a supporter of Israel in that battle, possibly, then this is certainly a reason why we could possibly be the supporter here as well. Okay, so this is very good. "And from the mouth of the serpent spewed water like a river, will take the woman and sweep her away in the torrent. But the earth helped the woman open its mouth to swallow the river, then poured out of the dragon's mouth. The dragon was enraged of the woman, went to war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold on to the testimony of Jesus." So again, this ties into Matthew 24:15 through 16, where we talk about Israel actually fleeing, and this happens very quickly after the abomination of desolation. Okay? Now, is that the end of it? We did it. We did it fast. That was a lot of pages. And I do encourage you, okay, to go back and read both those articles, because I didn't write them. And one has my viewpoint, and Irving Baxter is a good guy, and the other guy makes some phenomenal points, okay? But my point here is if we look in the Bible, we look for America, these are 2 very solid possibilities with eagle's wings, that maybe we are there to support Israel. We talked about Tarshish, that's going to come up again, and you're going to see that Tarshish is going to lead us somewhere. Tarshish is a very, very important thing, and you'll see why it all comes out in the last. When I heard these guys going on and on about how Tarshish probably was Britain and how it birthed America, well, I pretty much almost fell over. And I couldn't believe that they didn't know the other passages talk about Tarshish. And we're going to bring those up, and it gives a lot of history about some things that could be going on in the end times, and give you some identity for possibly America and where that all ends up. Okay, so hopefully this has been an interesting thing to me. I see these countries in the world today. I absolutely see that the eagle's wings have been ripped off, that clearly they don't seem to be part of that last final kingdom. Okay, and then again we see the woman that's clearly Israel. She's fleeing, and when does that happen? Flee the wilderness. That happens in the middle of the tribulation, and then somehow she's helped by eagle's wings. And that could mean that maybe America is there. Does that make sense? Because we didn't join what? The beast. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So are these weak points? They're pretty weak. But they're there, and it's just food for thought. Does that make sense? All right, so let's pray. Father Jesus, we thank you, and I do believe that no matter what is going on in the Bible, that you have a purpose for America. I believe that absolutely we have seen a miracle in America, that we absolutely have seen an absolute victory here, Lord God, and ever since that Donald Trump has been in, that he has maybe been the best president we have ever seen for Christians. And of course, we have been so persecuted, we were on the verge of losing our second and third amendment rights, Lord Jesus, the ability to really talk about you and really share the gospel with the world today. And I, Lord God, we know that we are in a battle in this country. But I know that we have a temporary stay in the execution of America, Lord God, that when any country departs from you and begins to follow other gods, that those other gods begin to have dominion, and those gods are Satan, and that there is only one thing that can happen, that Satan gets dominion of America and that America is imploding. But Lord God, there are other passages that we can look to. There are other passages that can give us hope. And most of all, importantly, God, we believe that you want to revive America. We believe that you want America to support Israel, that we are going to be a friend to Israel. We're really their only friend in the whole world, and we pray that America keeps that up. That the country that blesses Israel is the one that is also blessed by God, and that we would not forsake our heritage. And I pray that we would all use the time that we have to stay in the execution, to operate in the miracle, the prayers that we've been given, a new chance and a new lease on life here in America, to be able to live our lives before you in freedom and in liberty. In your name we pray.